Retro.
Hi, this is Emily Swallow, the Armorer in The Mandalorian. You're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. This is the way.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. We are your news anchors. I am Dennis Keithley.
And I am Jay Krebs.
And like I said, we're about to get into some Star Wars news here in this episode of Podcast Stardust. But before we dive into the latest, Jay, you want to remind everybody where we can be found around the internet?
Sure thing. No news here. We are on Facebook and Instagram, as always, at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the digital line, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So here is the latest. I can't remember how many weeks ago it was, Jay, that we were talking about this, but the original print of Star Wars was screened by the British Film Institute at the BFI On Film Festival in London. And we'd had a conversation about whether we'd want to see the original print or not. But anyway, it's finally happened. Kathleen Kennedy, president of Lucasfilm, was in attendance of all people. And she was there to kind of endorse the event, which I found interesting. But she was quoted as saying, "It's incredible folklore. Even when I came into the company, there was endless conversation about where everything was and what was in fact the first print. And it's quite remarkable. What you're going to see is in fact the first print. And I'm not even sure there's another one quite like it. It's that rare. There's so much tinkering that's gone on over the years and things that George decided, I'm going to change this. I'm going to try that." And then everybody kind of lost track of what it was. So, of course, some of the notable differences is that the movie is not called A New Hope in its opening crawl. And they preserved the fact that Han shot first in the meeting with Greedo in the cantina. And from everything I've been reading, there is a lot more differences between that print and what we are used to now as the definitive version of A New Hope than we all realized. What's your take? Have you been following any of the reaction to any of this?
Yeah, well, I remember, again, when we first started talking about this, I just thought, wow, that is so cool because, you know, you've got this very first cut, and George Lucas has gone on record several times by saying that he didn't like the first cut. It's just like anything else that any type of artist does or anyone does, it's like the first time around, it's like, oh gosh, I wish I would have done this, or I wish I would have done that. So he kind of really didn't want anybody to see it. But how awesome is it that, it's still, number one, it still exists.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost reminds me of, these old books that are in such, frail state that, people are like, oh, this is the first edition of this book. And it's almost revered in such a way that it's like awe inspiring. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so, I think it's really cool that she went on to say that, this screening, even though it has all of these differences, and as you said, it's very different than what we have now, and even from all of the different changes that have been made, it's almost kind of like a rite of passage that people get to see this as part of their, introduction to working with Star Wars too. And that, like, okay, this is the original and this is like the very first thing. And now this is how, we're going from here. Not necessarily this particular one, but the first version.
I got to say, though, I mean, some of the other actions of the people that actually went and saw it have been not very flattering of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Quoted, I think it's on Variety, is like, this was terrible. And what they've noted is that you do not realize how much work George has done beyond the special editions in 97 on this movie, to the extent that people were pointing out, like, you could tell that if you're at the Death Star and you see all these giant like supercomputers, they're plywood when you watch this old print of the whole thing. And just the quality of the grain on things. It's just like they said it's almost like watching a completely different movie on this.
Mhm.
And a lot of the people that are in attendance have said that it's given them a brand new appreciation for the current state of the movie as George Lucas has continued to update it through the years to make it look something that is much more modern and not a, late 60s early 70s sci-fi film that where the special effects just like bleed through the film cells on there.
Right.
So I found that to be incredibly interesting. I've thought about this a lot since we talked about it the last time, which is like, but I want to see this. And at the time I was like, possibly, but they were never going to completely recreate that print and put it in a whole bunch of theaters around the country to make it convenient for us. But now I'm just kind of like, I like my memories of Star Wars the way it is. Do I really want it tainted by an inferior product? If it's
Mhm.
really that bad. So I don't know. I'm kind of torn on this.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. That's totally
Mhm,
solid. I mean, I could see that because,
mhm,
we have this image of what Star Wars means to us.
mhm.
And like you said, those memories and that type of thing. And do we really want to, you know, change that? And that's the same thing too, even when you see the original of something when you're a kid and then somebody tries to do a reboot or a remake, sometimes it's not always the greatest thing. And you'd rather just had your memories of what you remember from being a kid.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree with all that, and I think in this case, Star Wars has a unique position in that take a movie that's not sci-fi from the
Hmm.
70s, and I, I said that now I'm at a loss to pick a movie from the 70s. But the point being is, pick something that's not sci-fi, and sure, you could show it to someone 40 or 50 years later, and it'd hold up just fine because it's not dependent on the special effects. Star Wars is, and if
Yeah.
you've got that much set building that's going on, that many special effects, and they don't look right on the screen, and we've been watching a certain way for the past 30 years again, like you said, it's just like I think I just want to stick with the way I know it and not necessarily go back to something so that anytime I'm watching that movie in the future, I'm not thinking back to this is not coming up. So, um, one other thing about this is that she had an opportunity to kind of talk that she being Kathleen Kennedy about the future Star Wars, and her comment was, I really think that now we're in a position where it's broadened the possibility of stories and filmmakers we can bring in to tell stories that mean something to them. It doesn't necessarily have to connect to every little thing that's been done in Star Wars. It can actually be a standalone story, and that builds into many, many other stories.
Mhm.
That is a really interesting quote. What's your takeaway from that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's what Star Wars has kind of been doing here lately anyway, in a lot of
Mhm.
ways. I mean, just one example off the top of my head, I mean, look at Tony Gilroy with Andor,
Right. I
And
think that's
even
exactly
though
what she means. Right.
yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, we've all seen how well he's been able to preserve the essence of Star Wars, but yet take it on an entirely different tangent in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
And, I was just having this conversation with someone just today, actually, how the Andor series itself is just it's so different from the traditional lightsabers and force and everything, but yet it has such an amazing storytelling presence within the Star Wars galaxy, and it obviously means something to Tony Gilroy. So I think, to your point, that's what she was meaning.
Hmm.
And, I think it's great. I mean, it's seeing Star Wars through different lenses and giving different people a chance to play in the sandbox that is Star Wars, but, still preserving what it means to everyone and going back to that essence of what George created.
Right. Another example would be Skeleton Crew, right? I mean,
Oh
that
yeah, for
is
sure.
a movie that doesn't tie into a whole lot of other Star Wars stuff that's going on.
Mhm.
And, you and I absolutely adored that series when it came out. All that being said, you know, the geeks in us really love finding connections with everything else that happens, right? I mean, really finding how certain scenes mirror things that we've seen in the movies, when they show up on Disney Plus and the like. And so I guess that's my way of saying I'm a little torn about this. It's we want a big interconnected universe, right?
Mhm.
And at the same time, that big interconnected universe kind of handcuffs them with what kind of stories that they can tell. So, yeah, again, Andor may not be tied into every little thing that's ever come before in Star Wars, but it is definitely tied into Rogue One. I mean, it's the,
Oh, for sure.
yeah, so it's not like it's this completely independent story. And Skeleton Crew is tied into things that we know about the Jedi, and there was oblique references to the High Republic in a way that ended up being nothing in the end of it there. So I guess that's my way of saying is I think there's balance to be struck there,
Oh,
where it
for
is, yeah, you'll tie it into the bigger overarching things, but don't necessarily worry about that one thing that happened on Naboo 12 years ago, when the senator from Rhodia showed up or something. It's
exactly.
you don't need to have the necessarily worry about having the story group come in and fact check every last detail in order to give us a good Star Wars story.
And I think what you said about finding the balance is perfect. Letting new stories stand on their own, but yet figuring out how they can enrich the saga.
Hmm.
And again, a lot of fans love Star Wars because of how interconnected it is. And that connective tissue has been a big part of what's made the franchise feel like one kind of living, breathing universe. But at the same time, again, to the galaxy, to the point the galaxy's huge.
Hmm.
And, I think what Kathleen Kennedy's talking about isn't just throwing out connection. It's about giving storytellers that freedom to build something new
Yeah.
and choose how and when to connect it later. Again, it's like what we saw with Andor, very much its own thing, but still rooted in that DNA of what Star Wars actually is.
And I can't help but wonder if she's also talking about things like she hated what Lord and Miller were doing on Solo, a Star Wars story.
Ah,
So
uh-huh.
she fired them and brought in Ron Howard. And similarly with Rogue One, they weren't getting the ending they wanted. So they brought in Tony Gilroy to reshoot 40% of the movie on that.
Mhm.
Now, you might argue, and I definitely would, that that was probably for the best because of how much we like Rogue One. But,
Right.
you know, maybe, well, I'm curious what Gareth Edwards' version of that would have been if he had
Oh,
been
yeah.
allowed to finish it.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
food for thought for sure. But
Yes.
moving on, apparently Bryce Dallas Howard tried to bring back Mace Windu. I I like the story, and I have a lot of questions. But appearing on the Happy, Sad, Confused podcast, Bryce Dallas Howard was talking about when she started working on Star Wars, how she would harass Dave Filoni about bringing back Mace Windu. She basically went to him and said, "So Mace Windu, is he alive or dead? Can we bring him back? What's the deal?" And the resolution to what that was not really given to us at the time. But then Samuel Jackson, also appearing on that podcast, said the only person I've ever said that to about coming back was Bryce Dallas Howard because I just did a movie with her, and she directs episodes of The Mandalorian. So you think you might be able to hook a brother up? I mean, you like me, right? I love that quote. And then following that up in an interview with the Direct, Bryce Dallas Howard said, I harassed Dave Filoni a lot about a lot of things, and that's just one. But yeah, no, that was a fun conversation, but it didn't add up to anything. So, okay, I like the idea of those two collaborating to bring back Mace Windu. But I got to ask, do you want Mace Windu to come back?
I think if it's done right, yes. Again, this kind of goes back to what we were just talking about with connective tissues and if things are preserving the essence of what was established originally, then I think it could be a good thing. But
Mm-hmm.
then again, just kind of what we were talking about in last news episode with Kino Loy and Andy Serkis, sometimes it's okay to just put the lid on a character. They don't have to come back to be a great character. Sometimes that
Yeah,
story just needs to end. So I am a little torn about that. I know it's not the best definitive answer, but that's what I got. What about you?
I'm a definitive no. I don't want him to come back post Revenge of the Sith. If you
Okay.
can
Yeah.
think of a way to have Samuel Jackson star as Mace Windu in a Star Wars story that precedes his demise in Revenge of the Sith, go for it. Do it. Here's what I'm concerned about. Where's he been this entire time? When there's a rebellion out there organizing to fight the Empire, why wasn't he part of that? And frankly, what I'm a little afraid of is being disappointed in that story the way that I was kind of disappointed with Secret Wars from the MCU. We got our standalone Nick Fury, and we had the disgruntled spy show that I don't think anybody was really signing up for when they watched that series. And is that probably not what we'd be getting with this situation, right? The broken Jedi that goes into hiding and then does what? And we've had that with the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. Do we need another one of those? I
Mm,
think
mhm.
Revenge of the Sith is stronger for the fact that a Jedi like Mace Windu, who was so powerful, was brought down by his own Hubri. The way that the Jedi Order was, he's the kind of symbol for that when it all comes down to it.
It's true.
I
Mhm.
mean, I've said it a number of times, I'm a Mace Windu apologist, but I like the character, and I think he had so many awesome moments in this. But I just kind of feel like having him survive all that does a disservice to Revenge of the Sith and to the story of Mace Windu when it's all said
Mhm.
and done.
No, I think that's a totally fair way to put it, and, a big part of me agrees with that because, again, if you try to do too much with a character, it just taints the entire flavor, if you will, of what that character has always been.
Yeah, Samuel Jackson is one of my favorite actors in Hollywood. I mean, top 5 probably. I just love his persona. I love the way he delivers lines. I love the way he carries himself. I think he's got a lot of range, and I love the fact that he was in Star Wars. And like I said, I mean, I'm not against getting more of him in Star Wars, but let's just put him in something that precedes Revenge of the Sith and tell that story. And there, I mean, they've been writing novels about Mace Windu. They can give us another. And lately we've been seeing how they've been willing to disregard things that haven't shown up on the screen. And now if we've got Kathleen Kennedy talking about making projects that aren't tied down to every little thing that's ever happened in Star Wars, fine. give us
Mhm.
give us a Mace Windu story that takes place during the Clone Wars. I would be there for that in a heartbeat. So,
Oh, yeah.
all right. Well, turning to the world of book and comics, the first thing we have is that the finale of the High Republic, Trials of the Jedi, was released this week. It was, of course, written by Charles Soule, who wrote Light of the Jedi, which kicked the entire High Republic off. I, from a conversation you and I had offline, I don't think you've had an opportunity to get into this yet, have you?
No, I haven't. I just pretty much cracked the spine on Into the Light, so I'm a little
Mhm.
behind, but, tell me what you got so far here. What are your reactions?
I am a third of the way into it. I've been reading it when I could during breaks from work from the past couple days, and I love it. This is good. Charles Soule is such a fantastic writer. How can I talk about it without spoiling it? I guess I would say it's kind of like the High Republic Avengers, in that
Mm,
he has taken characters from the various different media and put them all in this book. So you know how kind of there's certain book characters that are relegated to the High Republic adventures. They might get a
mhm.
passing reference in some of the other stuff, but they mainly show up there. You get those characters. You get other
Oh,
characters that are in the comics. They're now in this book. You get the characters that we've known from the young adult, middle grade, and adult novels. They're in this book. There are 3 notable exceptions, which I'm not going to bring up until we actually get around to reviewing this book. And that doesn't mean they won't show up later, but they're not in it at the 1/3 mark. So when are they going to show up is my question on this. But that being said, he has got such a way of evoking Star Wars with the way he writes, the imagery he concocts, the just even his chapters where the characters are just talking to each other about things to come or things that have happened, and like I love the work he's done in the Darth Vader comic book series. I really love Light of the Jedi. Everything he's touched on Star Wars, I've been a really big fan of, and this is really pleasing me. I've been looking for more time to read this book, and I just haven't had it yet. And so I'm looking forward to finishing it sometime in the next few days.
oh, that's awesome, and I'm looking forward to, once again, listening to Mark Thompson deliver this on audiobook because I do go back and forth, and I've always said that he does the best Markion Rowe. So if Markion Rowe is in this, then and I'm assuming he is, then, yeah, I'm here for it.
He does a lot of great voices, and I've made the conscious decision to read the hardback version of this book before I revisit in the audiobook, which I've actually already purchased in this, and I'll do it again before we get around to reviewing it. And that time I'll probably end up listening to the entire thing as I do dog walks in order to prepare. Mainly because there are some voices for the characters that I've established in my head from other authors
Mhm,
that I
mhm.
like. And so,
Yeah.
and mainly, Martian does a lot of great voices, but I prefer other narrators that are women who have done like Avar Chris.
Mhm.
And that's not to besmirch anything that Mark Thompson's done. It's just that women do better women's voices, men do better men's voices. That's just the way it is. And so I went ahead and just made the decision to read this on off the page first. And then later when I'm revisiting it and I've got this all square in my mind, then I'll listen to the audio version. But I'm looking forward to doing that. So,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm just looking forward to the book in general because, of course,
oh
we
yeah.
both love Charles Soule, and it's just fitting that he gets to write the last book as well as the first.
Yeah, no, he deserved it. And again, I'm only a third of the way through, and that doesn't mean that I won't be disappointed with things that happen later. I doubt it, but I really like what's happened so far. He's kept the thing moving, and I'm like, how am I a third of this book already? It's just a page turner. So,
Awesome. Looking forward
oh,
to it.
all right. Well, we got a little bit of comic news, and that is that there are two new miniseries coming. And the first is Han Solo Hunt for the Falcon. This will be coming on September 3rd of this year. It's a 5-issue miniseries written by Rodney Barnes, who's previously brought us Lando, Double or Nothing, War of the Bounty Hunters, IG-88. He's also done the Mandalorian adaptation, the Inquisitors miniseries, which came out last year, and we'll be reviewing on the podcast soon, as well as his work on the Ahsoka adaptation. And it's got art by Ramon Rosanas, I think I pronounced that correctly, who has previously done work on Age of Resistance and the ongoing Star Wars series. So the story is that Han and Chewie are coming out of retirement after they've managed to lose the Falcon, and this will be set in the years preceding The Force Awakens. It will also feature Leia and Lando. So, what do you think about this?
Oh my gosh, I am so here for this. I just
Mm-hmm.
think this is gonna add a whole new layer to the lore because I've often wondered, okay, the whole thing with Duquesne and like how did they lose the Falcon and how did it end up on Jakku? Like this is bound to get like fans talking, I think. And yeah, love it. Excited to see how this plays out on the page.
Yeah, me too. I'm eager to see this. I can't wait for it to come out. It's something that we'll probably be tackling in 2026, based on it being a monthly issue. Won't conclude until then, and we tend to wait until these things are all done on these miniseries before we tackle them here on the show. But yeah, I mean, I like Rodney Barnes' work that he's done that I've read in Star Wars, so I'm intrigued by this story. And I can't remember the entire litany of people that had the Falcon after Duquesne stole it from Han Solo,
Yeah.
but I I can imagine this 5-part series like tracking that down as he's trying to figure out,
Yeah.
the such and such stole it from such and such who stole it from me, who stole it from me, Han Solo. So
Exactly.
yeah, that sets itself up for I feel like in some way the outline kind of wrote itself after that
Mhm.
little line from The Force Awakens.
It's true.
Yeah. But that's not the only comic we have coming out. We also get Boba Fett Black, White, and Red, which will be arriving in September 2025. This is a 4-issue miniseries written by Benjamin Percy with art by Chris Allen. And I'm not really familiar with the work that either of those have done. This is the follow up Black, White, and Red series to Darth Vader and Darth Maul. A description of issue 1 is that Boba Fett finds himself trapped in a situation he seemingly can't get out of. The Empire and the extreme rebel faction are after the same bounty. Boba Fett needs to track down a deadly individual who has played both sides, and to make things even more impossible, his target is hiding out in a volatile volcanic system. Wonder if they need Mustafar.
Mm. That's
We'll
what I
see.
was wondering. Yeah.
Yeah, but did you get a chance to read either of the Black, White, and Red Darth Vader or Darth Maul series?
No, and that's definitely on my radar.
Hmm.
So, having Boba Fett come into this series is pretty fitting for his mystique, I think.
Yeah, the thing about the Black, White, and Red is that they tend to be more of an anthology. So you might have a story that weaves itself through all 5 issues, but then there'll be like 3 other stories going on at the same time from different eras or whatever. And they can also be a bit more violent than the average comic there. I
Okay.
read some of the Darth Vader and some of the Darth Maul. I didn't finish either one of them. I need to get back to that. I'm way behind on my Star Wars comics. But, as you said, Boba Fett's got all kinds of intrigue and mystique around him. So this situation that I described is really pretty cool. He's got to do his own thing, which he does all the time, and play the Empire off the rebellion with regards to this bounty. It just seems a little weird that the rebellion is putting bounties on people, though.
Yeah, I know. I picked up on that also, and it just doesn't seem like it's part of their MO. But yet, I mean, I guess we've seen similar things in Andor with Luthen.
Right, and Saw Gerrera for that
So,
matter. Yeah,
yes.
and they do say it's an extreme rebel faction, so maybe that
True.
is Saw Gerrera for all we know.
Ooh, there you go.
Depends on when they said it. Okay, well, again, you can look for these new comics coming out in September, and that will do it. That'll bring us to the end of this week's Star Wars news. It's always fun to discuss these things. I really like, as much as I like having good hard and fast news, it is fun to kind of discuss these ideas about Mace Windu coming back, or what Kathleen Kennedy has to say about the future of Star Wars. It just kind of fills the imagination, and it's always fun to talk about it with you, Jay. And I hope all of our listeners have enjoyed it, and if so, please consider subscribing to Podcast Stardust on your podcatcher of choice if you haven't done so already. And if you've done that, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a rating and review wherever it is that you listen to your podcast. And if you want more episodes of the show beyond what you're going to have on your podcatcher, we just recently crossed that 900 episode barrier, and you can find all those episodes over on richesapp.com. We have a very eclectic collection of
Yes,
episodes over
that's a
there.
good way to put it.
You're
Eclectic.
right. We've talked about everything at some point.
Mhm.
So you want to know what we think about your favorite Star Wars topic? Go search for it over on Riches app. Jay, remind everybody what our social media contacts are and where else we can be found online.
I would love to. Yes, we are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. Very convenient. And we also have some Pinterest boards that you can check out. And we also have 2 YouTube outlets. So no videos, pictures, but you can listen to us all the same. And so we have the traditional YouTube as well as YouTube music. So head over to both of those, like, subscribe, and share those out. And if you are in need of some swag for your closet or for your home, we do have a T Public store, and the link for that is in our show notes. And we do have 7 different show logo designs available on all kinds of things, from t-shirts, sweatshirts, and tank tops to tote bags and coffee mugs. So once again, the link is in our show notes, and every one of those purchases does help to support the show. We'd love to see what you get. So please snap a picture and tag us, because I always say we like to see where those things end up in the wild, and we definitely do.
I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the listeners of the Be Our Guest podcast that I was talking to this week that all let me know that they were checking the show out for the first time this week. So I hope you all enjoyed it, and you'll stick around and let me know what you think after you've heard this.
Well, yes, hello there.
Yeah. Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what you're doing in cosplay?
Absolutely. So you can find me on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay, as Ahsoka, the fourth sister. So speaking of Inquisitors, my favorite Inquisitor, as well as my 2 different versions of Hera, including the live action and animated versions. Also my original concept Mandalorian, which I am working on upgrading a little bit this summer. So you can check out some things in my stories there, as well as some non-Star Wars things as well. So once again, that's at j.snipscosplay.
All right. Upcoming on the show on Monday, we are getting back into our Clone Wars rewatch, starting with episode 9 of season 2, which is called Grievous Intrigue. We had to take a break while we were getting through Andor and Light and Magic and Tales.
And.
Yeah, Tales of the Underworld. So we had so much recent content to cover that we had to kind of put that aside for a while. But now we're caught up. So we're getting back into the Clone Wars. And with that, just want to thank you all for listening to episode 902 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great weekend. And until next time, may the Force be with you.